Hi, Matthew. Good to be back. Ali Haji, Chief Executive of Ion Energy, trading on the Venture Exchange here in Toronto under ticker Ion. We control 110,000 hectares of highly prospective lithium brine licenses in Mongolia. Always a pleasure to be back.
Ali, good to have you back. So we're back, obviously, face-to-face in November in London. It's good to see you then. Just want to catch up, really, because since we spoke in different world, right? We've got these political tensions over here in the shape of Russia and Ukraine situation. Supply, demand fundamentals don't seem to have changed too much. And I think maybe there's some questions that you can help us help answer and help us sort of understand what's going on out there. Okay, right. So I've got to kick off. Your share price, 48 cents when we spoke in November, 36 today. Been a market decline there. I mean, what's going on?
Well, I think, the geopolitical risk weighs into it. The retail market is quite sensitive to what's happening in the region, as you should be. I think Russia doing things that are generally considered unprecedented with respect to the invasion of Ukraine will obviously build in a bit of a lack of tolerance for risk, if you will, but more importantly, it is unprecedented, as I said. This is a war that is capturing the attention of the world, that is very similar to what we would have seen in previous eras. Mongolia bordering Russia is obviously something that folks would be concerned about. Mongolia was a Soviet satellite, and as a result of that, and the fact that it neighbors it, essentially asked the world to pay attention. Mongolia to us is a country that was a Soviet satellite, has had sovereignty since about the 1990s, remains one that is influenced and very much supported by the Germans, remains supported by the Germans, the US, India, as well as the Japanese and the Koreans. And so this is a state that's very important to sort of the natural resources in the region. What we've seen as far as Mongolia and the Russia conflict is concerned is Russia is not too keen on Mongolia. We've seen Rio Tinto, as of very recently, look to settle the debt with the Mongolian government. So they settled $2.4 billion with the Mongolian government in the last quarter, which says that they're keen on Mongolia as an investment proposition. And as of this morning, Rio Tinto looked to acquire Turquoise Hill, which is the third largest copper gold deposit in the world, for $2.7 billion from Turquoise Hill. So it's a country that is ripe for consolidation, that is resource rich, that we see as ultimately not only a conduit, but a major supplier of resources in the region. So the conflict doesn't quite affect Mongolia as you might imagine. In terms of the share price, 58, as you did say, back in December.
48. 48. It's not as sharp a decline as from 58, but yeah, it's at 48 cents when we spoke back in November.
48 cents back in December, and that was a result of the hype with respect to the auger drilling program. And today, 35, 34, whatever it may be, is a bit of a decline. But you have to understand that auger drilling program was our intent or our ability to de-risk the asset without access to the ultimate asset. What we're doing to sort of advance these things is we're taking on and visiting the country with our strategic advisors, be it Don Haynes, be it Paul Fornazzari, be it a number of other analysts at the banking firms that led the bought deal for our last transaction. Now that we have access to country, we can take these individuals down to country and ultimately launch a program, if you will, that is world class.
So you're taking the analysts that did the associated with the banks who did the original raise for you. I mean, so what they go into country? What do they see? What's going to make them come back raving about your project?
I think there's huge value with respect to realizing that this is a paleo-solar. It's 81,000 hectares. It's subterranean, but we've seen results at 1,502 ppm. And relative to our peers, that is significantly larger in terms of grade.
I said that's improved. The grade has improved since we last spoke.
Indeed.
Okay. To what? I mean, in terms of where, like in terms of peers, who should we be looking at? Is it high for Mongolia, or is it high in the market? I mean,
It's high globally. So if you look at the Atacama, a significant supplier of lithium today, yet it has its environmental issues. 1250 was sort of the average grade obtained. I wouldn't even say average, but somewhat the highest grade obtained in the Atacama. And now we're looking at 1502 ppm in Mongolia. On the doorstep of China, this is relevant. It's no longer a case of, this is an anomaly that is quite concentrated. It's a salar that's paleo in nature, that's 81,000 hectares. So this is why the importance needs to be put towards the region.
Okay, so how do we get excited here? Because last year it seemed to move at a sort of fairly sedentary pace. You've got $4 million in the bank, which is enough to kind of get you through a campaign, as it were. You've identified this higher grade, which is good news. So have your plans changed in terms of where you're going to be drilling, where these augers are, or is it sticking to the original plan? Because no one seemed to be that excited about the original plan.
Of course. Well, the auger rig, as I said, the auger program was directed towards providing news flow, but also de-risking or scratching the surface of a massive license. Now that we have this detail between Don Haynes, Paul Fornazzari, and the rest of us, we've designed and developed a program that will de-risk these assets very similar to what you would have done in the Atacama. So now we can actually spend the money in country. But you have to realize, Matthew, Mongolia is a nation that has never had any sort of exposure to lithium brine, right? Oil and gas, perhaps, but brine, not so much. And in the height of the pandemic, without access to the country, why would we spend excessive amounts of money on a program that may not be successful? So we scratched the surface using the auger program. We saw 1502, which is greater than you would see in the Atacama. And now we will kickstart a program that will allow us to de-risk the basin in its entirety.
So do you think smaller companies like yours, in terms of the early exploration stage, companies like yours, I know you've got the licenses and there's big swathes of land, etc. Is the government giving you credit? Are they giving you due care and attention, or do they want the likes of Rio to come in and access these huge, mineralized bodies, which seem to be littered around the country? I mean, how do you get them on board?
I see two ways. I think the Rios of the world would want to come in and ultimately take ownership. And I think we mentioned this at the onset of this conversation, which is, Rio today has looked to acquire the debt that Mongolia has in their project at the Oyu-Tolgoi mine. And as of this morning, they offered to acquire the set, or rather the equity that Turquoise Hill has. So the fact that a company like Rio is now looking to consolidate in the country tells you that this is promising. But beyond that, I think these early stage projects, the fact that we have control over them now and we continue to de-risk them, the hiring of our director, Wendy Lee, in Asia, she has a number of relationships with the Gangfengs, the Tianqis, and the rest of the world that exists within there, including DFD and XTC. She continues to have conversations with them to bring them on board as an equity partner. As a company, ION has consistently said that we are not a production story. What we would look to do is bring in some strategics for a small equity stake that ultimately allow us to leverage their intellectual capital, and then they will outbid themselves for an ultimate acquisition. So I think Mongolia is ripe for opportunity. The prime minister today is, just over 40. He's a Harvard graduate. The old guard from the Russian socialistic state is now moving away. And we're seeing these younger individuals step into the game or the foray of entrepreneurship. They're educated overseas and they continue to advance the economy. So Mongolia, in our view, is very ripe for opportunity.
I guess, tell me more about Wendy Lee. I'm intrigued by this in terms of, again, given the stage you're at and given the profile that you've just described her as having, what is your brief to her, given the early stage of where you're at?
Of course. So Wendy and I have been speaking since about mid to late last year, I'd say. She approached me. I've had a few references that showed me that Wendy was a credible individual to add to the team. Importantly, we added her in March, so it took a while to sort of de-risk and understand her capabilities. But she was at Noble Group, and Noble was a major commodities trader in Asia and across the world, primarily out of Singapore. And what she was able to do in her role was allow for offtake agreements for copper, gold, and coal out of Mongolia into the Chinese sort of mainland. And so she's built relationships there, and she continues to have done so. She has a fantastic sort of network of individuals that we do continue to leverage. Across her, Paul Fornazzari, who sold Lithium to Zijin, as you know, was also the chairman of Lithium Americas, and a number of other things that we've done around the world in that sort of resource space. I think we built a team here that will allow us to have a good either exit or strategic partner.
Right, but you've got to get on with the business of actually finding lithium within this brine and lots of it, and kind of there's some steps to go through first, right? So she's going to make sure people are aware of what's going on there. So let's come back to what is going to be going on there this year. $4 million. How do you allocate that? What are you now hunting for, and what do you want to be able to present to the market?
Great question, Matthew. In terms of the data that we've seen so far, we talked about scratching the surface, we talked about geophysics, we talked about CSAMT. So we know where the aquifers exist. We've been able to actually access those aquifers and prove the hypothesis that they do in fact exist. We've been since designing, between myself, Don, Paul, and a few others, the program that we will kick off in April. So what we'll be doing on the ground on Babayo this year accounts for about between $750 to $1 million Canadian, with $4 million in the bank at the end of last year, with a very low burn rate, because we're not one that tends to be a lifestyle company, for lack of a better word. The intent is to have an extensive program kickoff on April 15th when we're in country, details of which will be shared via press releases. It is hydrogeological driven, so we will be pulling up brine at specific depths, encapsulated without any sort of contamination on their way up. We'll measure flow rates. We'll understand exactly what is happening under the ground. But importantly, once this program is completed, the key thing to understand is that you have an early resource indication. And we've seen multiple exits that are precedent transactions in the space over the last few years. And that tells you that when you have an early resource indication, you can start to bring in the strategics to ultimately either acquire you or be a partner from an intellectual perspective to allow you to bring these assets to production.
Right. Okay. Do you want to put that in sort of simple layman's terms of what do you think you're going to be producing, so that the market can understand, compare to your peers in whatever form of lithium potential production, whether it be brine or otherwise, that's going to say to them, you've got the ability to, one, find something of size and note that if you need technical assistance, that you're on the doorstep of, I guess, China and a number of obvious parties, and how you advance those conversations, because otherwise this is a long drawn out conversation. Where are you? 20 odd million, 25 million market cap. There's a long sort of drawn out process of hoping that your warrants come good, which is around sort of 70 cents sort of mark. A bit off that at the moment. Yeah.
So in terms of where we are today, 4 million in the bank at the end of December, obviously quite a advantageous position to be in. The fact that we have analysts and experts in the field ready to go with us on site, now that we have access to site, we can build a program that will really hit the ground hard. And I think that's important. What we've done historically is really scratch the surface without access to the ground. In terms of what we've built as far as our team and the access to these strategics in Asia as well as Europe, we've seen a fair bit of interest that also is prompting us to consider a listing in the UK. So on the back of Minds and Money in December, we've had some interest to list on the AIM, and we've had a bit of capital sort of presented to us, which I think would go a very long way to ultimately de-risking these assets. Well, now that we have access to these assets and we have the necessary teams to develop and devise those exploration programs, the hydrogeological program alongside the sort of evaporation and meteorological programs providing samples to the likes of major sort of DLE type platforms will allow us to get to a point where we understand exactly how quickly we can bring this asset to production, but more importantly, the quality of these assets.
Okay, well, let's. Okay, I look forward to hearing more about that. That's interesting. Can you talk to me about Aranjin? You signed a sort of binding term sheet with them. To what end? Obviously, they're after like copper and nickel, but what's the plan in terms of working with them?
Well, Aranjin is a company that is led by the same chairman, and I think that's important to note. There's a bit of overlap and cross-pollination with respect to the board members, but it's also in Mongolia, a country that I understand quite well, and I've been to a number of times, and obviously ION is a company that I run there. So what we looked at in terms of Aranjin is the fact that it had no real leader or chief executive or what have you. What we look to do here is copper and lithium are both battery metals, right? And the fact that we now control the largest swaths of land for copper and lithium in country makes us quite significant given the world's moving towards a clean, green energy future. And so the intent here is why not look for synergies between the two companies? And we found that over the course of that Augur program. So when we had the Augur program, we found anomalies for copper and nickel on Bavayo, which is our flagship ION Energy's license. So we looked to monetize those anomalies by signing a JV with Aranjin, whereby they had to spend $3 million US on ION's licenses. So they're de-risking our assets, which is fantastic, at no cost to us, but they're also figuring out a way to monetize any copper or nickel that was found on these assets for ION Energy's purpose. So I think it made sense synergistically. I think it makes sense from a country perspective and from a leadership perspective as well.
Okay, and you're going on their board as well, I note.
I am. I'm actually the chief executive of Aranjin as well.
Gotcha. Okay, got it. It's going to be like that. Okay, so there's £3 million obligation for them. Have they got the money today, or do they need to go and raise that?
It's in the midst of being raised. There's enough interest there. If you look at their comps, I mean, Aranjin, I think, has spent, or the assets they've acquired have had over 17 million US spent on them. Their market cap today is about 10 million Canadian. They've had massive intercepts that are quite profitable in nature. And so as a result of that, it just made sense to bring those two under one leader, if you will.
Gotcha. And then $500,000 spend, you're obliged to spend half, so ION is obliged to spend $500,000 on the same exploration project, right?
Correct.
Got it. Okay. So of your $4 million, half of that is allocated to this joint venture?
Over the next 3 years.
Over the next 3 years. Okay, great. Okay.
So we have lots of time there, and as we start to de-risk our assets, I would assume the company will become better capitalized.
Okay, that's an interesting one. Obviously, so what happened to the company that spent 17 million on it? Was that just a timing issue of the copper wasn't at the right price, or is this a relatively recent
It's
spend?
a couple of things. A timing issue, but also when they exited, copper wasn't doing as well as it is today. Nickel and everybody else is flying, and I think they just opted to exit the country and what have you. So we acquired them through various means on the Aranjin front, and we look forward to putting that out to market.
Oh, cool! I'd love to hear that story proper, because that's kind of, it's obviously very top. Both nickel and copper prices in the market are extraordinary at the moment, especially nickel. Hopefully that comes back to some normal level soon. But that obviously very, very timely, very, very topical, etc. And maybe some synergies, as you say, on that one. Interesting indeed. Well, look, Ali, great always catch up with you. I admire us of all CEOs of companies of a certain size in terms of how they manage the cash. You look or sound like you're funded, and obviously if there is an option of a UK listing, then that aids you further, not to mention brings you some new shareholders as well over here. So stay in touch. Let us know how you get on.
Cheers, Matthew. Good to be with you.